Why more and more men are giving up on dating? Something is happening, and it's happening quietly. More and more women are wondering why men are no longer taking the lead. They ask each other, where have all the good men gone? They scroll through dating apps, go to work, attend social events, and yet the men around them seem detached, silent, or simply gone. Some assume men are too busy. Others believe men have become selfish or incapable of love. But what they don't realize is this: many men have already given up. They've given up chasing. They've given up trying to impress. They've given up opening their hearts, trusting, and hoping for meaningful relationships. Not because they don't need love, but because they're exhausted. The truth is, more men are choosing solitude, but they won't say it out loud. They don't post sad statuses. They don't complain to their friends. They simply go quiet. A deep silence that lingers and spreads like fog. They still go to work, eat their meals, even laugh. But inside, there's a growing belief that love is no longer meant for them. Not because they're unworthy, but because they've tried, and they've been hurt too many times to keep believing. We live in a world that encourages women to express themselves, to heal, to seek out what they deserve. But men are told two simple words: man up. When a woman says she feels lonely, dozens will listen, support, and empathize. But when a man says the same, he's corrected, told to be stronger, to improve himself. If no one loves him, people assume he's the problem. Over time, those words stop being motivation. They become pressure. When effort brings no results, men don't get angry. They shut down. You'll see them everywhere. The man quietly sipping coffee alone. The one staring at his phone on the subway, not texting anyone. The man eating dinner in silence with no one waiting at home. They no longer talk about love. They don't leave comments under pretty photos. They don't start conversations. They've stepped back. And no one noticed. No one really asked why. No one stayed long enough to hear the answer. But the reason isn't complicated. Men aren't walking away because they hate women. They're walking away because they no longer see a place for themselves in this world. A world where they're only worthy of love if they're rich enough, attractive enough, charismatic enough. A world where one wrong move is labeled creepy. A world where they are no longer a need, but just an option. And if they're not exceptional, they won't be chosen at all. The scary part isn't that men are angry. It's that they're hopeless. They once tried to be kind. They once hoped for something real. They once learned to speak with honesty. But they realized this modern world doesn't reward sincerity. It only sees surface-level appeal. In a game they were never taught how to play, they kept losing, and eventually, after too many losses, they walked away from the arena. You might call that cowardice. But imagine living in a world where you constantly have to compete just to be seen as worthy of affection. Imagine being overlooked because you're not tall enough, wealthy enough, or smooth enough. Imagine watching others easily receive what you've worked so hard for, only to fail again and again. That's not cowardice, that's exhaustion. And when you're too tired to keep trying, you don't lash out, you don't rebel, you just sit down and go silent. That's why more men are giving up on dating. They're not blaming anyone, they're not angry at women. They've simply stepped away from a game they no longer believe they can win. So when you ask, where did all the men go? The answer is simple. They're still here. They just stopped believing love was meant for them. If you want to understand what's really happening between men and women today, don't just look at those who are dating. Look at the ones who are silent. Because that silence, it says more than words ever could. It tells you that something has shifted deep inside this culture. And that shift is quietly pushing men out of the picture. When average men become unwanted. For thousands of years, men were hunters, warriors, protectors, and providers. They were the foundation not because they were superior, but because society needed them to survive. That era is over. There are no more invaders at the gate, no more fields that must be plowed, no more need for a man to carry logs or guard the tribe. In today's world, women no longer need a man to survive. They can work, buy property, raise children on their own. They can live, love, give birth, divorce, and rebuild all without a man ever touching their lives. That's not a bad thing. It's a historic victory for human progress. But like any major shift, someone always gets left behind. And this time, it's the average man. The man without a chiseled body. The man who doesn't earn six figures. The man who isn't charismatic. Doesn't play the social game. Doesn't post flashy updates on Instagram. This man used to have value when stability, patience, and quiet strength were enough. But in today's hyper-selective fast-moving world, those traits don't shine. They're seen as boring, forgettable, even weak. In a world where everyone has access to thousands of options with a single swipe, your presence becomes fragile. Dating apps have turned love into a brutal marketplace. 80% of women focus on the top 10 to 20% of men. That means the remaining 80% of men are left to fight over what little is left. And if you're an average man, nothing flashy, nothing extreme, you're not rejected because you're bad. You're ignored because you're invisible. There was a time when a good mankind, hardworking, loyal, could build a life with a woman who valued those things. But now, he has to compete with men who have thousands of followers, who know how to craft the perfect bio, say all the right things, turn their life into a highlight reel. If he can't do that, he's called boring. And if he's boring, he's eliminated. Imagine walking into a room where everyone's invited to play a game, but you're the only one who wasn't given the rules. You don't know where to begin, what you're being judged on, or why you keep getting kicked out. All you know is you're losing again and again. And eventually, you begin to think it's your fault. But the truth is, you're not broken. You just didn't know the rules changed. The new rules are about visibility, excitement, and attention. In a world where attention is currency, the average man has no value to trade. Not because he's not enough, but because the system no longer knows how to measure him. And when something can't be measured, it stops existing. This is the tragedy of evolution. As part of society moves forward, the rest will fall behind if they can't keep pace. Women have risen beautifully, reclaiming power, defying expectations, mastering independence. But men haven't been taught how to evolve. They're still locked in an outdated script: be strong, be successful, be the leader. But when those things are no longer the key to love, they don't know what's left to offer. What's cruel is that no one stopped to tell them the rules had changed. No one pulled them aside and said, "This is how things work now." They're just left on the sidelines, wondering why they're no longer chosen, no longer seen, no longer needed. And when a man no longer feels needed, he stops showing up. No one wants to keep trying only to be coldly dismissed. No one wants to throw their heart into the void. That's when he begins to retreat from love, not because he stopped believing in it, but because he stopped believing that love like his has a place in this world anymore. When trying still isn't enough, men choose silence. No one gives up while there's still hope. No one walks away when they still believe that effort will lead to something meaningful. But what happens when you do everything right? Follow every piece of advice. give your all and still get left behind. That's the reality for many men today. They've heard the world say go to the gym, work on yourself, make more money, read books, learn communication skills, and they listened. They followed through. No complaints, no excuses. They spent years improving themselves. But even after all that, they're still not loved, still not chosen, still unseen. The world told them to change in order to be worthy of love. But when they did, love never came. And that's when a dangerous feeling starts to creep in, the belief that something inside them is broken, that there's a flaw so deep, no amount of self-improvement can fix it. No one says it to their face. But the distant looks, the indifferent words, the silence from those they hoped would care all whisper the same thing: you're defective. Some men train every day. They push their bodies to exhaustion in the gym, hoping someone will finally see them as desirable. Some work multiple jobs just to feel like they're financially ready for a real relationship. Others study books, rehearse conversations, memorize jokes just to make one woman smile. But no matter how hard they try, they keep falling short of some invisible standard, outshined by someone more handsome, more confident, more effortless. And that's what breaks them, not the lack of effort, but the fact that their effort doesn't matter. If you've never felt that, you won't understand how it slowly destroys your spirit. It's not a loud kind of pain. It doesn't explode like rage. It burns quietly, like a small flame that eats away at every last bit of hope. And when the flame goes out, all that's left is the silence. That's why more men are going quiet. Not because they don't want love, but because they no longer believe they're capable of receiving it. The modern world has raised the standards of connection while giving men no map. They're like competitors in a game where the rules were never explained. And after losing again and again, they don't want to play anymore. They don't blame anyone. They're not angry at women, they're not mad at society. They just retreat. They withdraw into their own world, a place where they're not judged, not rejected, not forced to perform. They go back to their rooms, where no one sees their weakness, their disappointment, or the question that haunts them every day. Do I still have any value? And the most painful part, many of these men used to believe in love. They believed that if they just became better people, kinder, more patient, more sincere, someone would eventually see them. But when sincerity is labeled as awkward, when effort is seen as desperation, they learn a harsh truth in this game. Not everyone gets a turn. Some people, no matter how hard they try, simply never get picked. So they stop trying. They stop sending the first message. They stop opening up. They stop initiating conversations. They still go to work, still laugh in public, still show up in social spaces. But inside, there's a door that's quietly closed, a door that once stood wide open, waiting for someone to walk through. Now it just hangs a silent sign that reads, "Closed, please don't knock." The world sees these men and thinks they're cold, that they're emotionally unavailable, that they're arrogant. But in truth, they've loved deeply, tried endlessly, and hurt quietly. And now they're simply protecting what's left. Because if they open up one more time, they're afraid there might be nothing left to protect. That's what makes them so invisible to society. They're not chasing validation, not expecting comfort, not asking for attention. They just live like shadows, quiet, distant, unbothered, and unwilling to let anyone close. And so they enter their private world, a world where they can't be judged, but also can't be truly loved, a world that keeps them safe from harm, but also away from joy, a world that may protect them from further pain, but also steals their chance at happiness. And once they get used to that world, very few ever return. The room men lock themselves inside. When the outside world becomes too unpredictable, too cold, and too easy to get hurt in, men begin to retreat into a space they can control. A place where they're not judged, not rejected, not abandoned. And that place is rarely the real world. It's their room, with a phone, a laptop, a pair of headphones, and a digital world where they don't need to be handsome, don't need to be charming, don't need to outperform anyone. All they need is a Wi-Fi connection, and it's enough. In that space, they can play video games for hours without being criticized. They can watch adult content without the fear of rejection. They can scroll endlessly through TikTok, YouTube, or Instagram to escape the growing emptiness inside. And the dangerous thing is it works, at least in the short term, because each time they win a game, each time they watch something stimulating, or get a quick hit of attention online, their brain rewards them with a chemical dopamine, the hormone that tells the mind, this feels good. But dopamine comes fast and fades faster. And when it fades, they're left with the same old reality alone, tired and more disconnected than ever. They begin to live between two worlds. The real world is cold. The digital world is forgiving. The real world demands change. The digital world accepts them as they are. The real world reminds them they're not enough. The digital world lets them forget what they're missing. And so they stay in that room, lock the door, mute the noise, and disappear. But this disappearance isn't rest. It's paralysis, emotional freeze, a way of living where nothing feels real anymore, where they no longer believe human connection is something available to them. Not because they don't need it, but because they once needed it, tried for it, and failed. Now they just exist, like a machine that breathes. You'll see them in public, at work, at gatherings, smiling when expected, talking when necessary. But they're not really present. They don't let people in. They don't open up. They listen more than they speak. They observe, but don't engage, because they've learned that the more they open up, the more they risk getting hurt. And after being hurt too many times, the natural reaction is to shut down. So why is it so hard for them to connect? The root cause isn't social media. It isn't gaming. It isn't porn. Those are symptoms, not the disease. The real issue lies deeper. Somewhere few are willing to go into memory and emotion. Many men grow up never learning how to connect emotionally. They're taught how to win, how to control, how to endure. But no one teaches them how to love, how to share, how to receive care without feeling shame. From a young age, they're told, don't cry, toughen up, be a man. And so they grow into people they barely recognize, men who don't even know how to name what they feel. And when you don't understand yourself, you can't connect with others. Because how can you love someone else if you've never learned how to love yourself? How can you build a real relationship when every time someone gets close, you're terrified they'll see your wounds? So to keep those wounds hidden, they choose isolation in the same familiar room where they can mute the world with one tap, where they don't need to explain why they're not okay, where they can live as a simplified version of themselves, comfortable but incomplete. Over time, that room stops being a retreat. It becomes a cage, a soft, quiet, invisible cage. No one forces them to stay there, but no one gives them a strong enough reason to leave either. And once you get used to safety, you begin to fear freedom. Once you've lived in sadness long enough, joy starts to feel dangerous. Once you've been silent for too long, hearing your own emotions again becomes unbearable. That's how millions of men are living today, unseen, misunderstood, and no one's knocking on their door. Because the world has forgotten something fundamental, that to truly live, a man needs more than work and responsibility. He needs to be seen. He needs to be understood. He needs to feel connected, just like everyone else. Men don't know how to love because no one ever taught them. People often say that men today are emotionally unavailable, that they don't know how to care, how to share, how to truly love. But few ever ask the harder question: who actually taught them how to love? The truth is, most men grow up without ever learning how to deal with their own emotions. They aren't encouraged to talk about sadness. They're not taught how to handle pain. And they certainly don't know what real emotional connection looks like. While girls are taught how to listen, how to empathize, how to express their feelings, boys are taught how to suppress them, to endure, to get it over with. As children, if they cried after falling, they were told, boys don't cry. If they felt afraid, they were told to man up. If they felt lonely, they learned to hide it. And over time, layer by layer, this forms a man who can achieve many things, but not emotional connection. In psychology, this is called attachment dysfunction. It happens when a child grows up in an emotionally unstable environment where their feelings are either ignored or invalidated. These children become adults who are excellent at hiding their emotions. They can work. They can take on responsibilities. But when it comes to love, they struggle. They want to love, but don't know how. Their love often comes across as controlling, fearful, or distant. And the saddest part is they don't even realize it. Because to them, silence feels normal. Distance feels natural. Suppression feels like survival. So when they enter a relationship, they often find it hard to express how they feel, not because they lack emotions, but because they never learned the language for them. I once met a man like that. He was kind, successful, and genuinely tried to do everything right. He loved a woman with everything he had, but she kept saying, "I don't feel loved by you." He was confused. He took her out, bought gifts, texted every day. But to her, it all felt empty. Eventually, he went to therapy. After several sessions, he realized something he had never truly opened up. He always maintained a subtle emotional distance. He focused on doing the right things instead of feeling the right things. He loved through actions, but not through presence. And it was that absence, the emotional void, that made her feel alone in a relationship that looked complete on the outside. But the story didn't end there. As he started healing, he learned how to truly connect. He learned to listen, to share, to say "I'm hurting" instead of walking away. And then, the woman left. She started pulling away, questioning everything. Eventually, she ended the relationship. Why? Because she was carrying her own wounds too. She had spent years loving emotionally unavailable men. And when she finally met someone who was ready to commit, she didn't know how to receive it. She panicked. Because deep down, she had never felt safe in real emotional intimacy either. That's the bitter irony of trauma. Wounded people often find each other, hoping to heal together, but instead, they end up triggering each other. One is afraid of being left behind, or the other is afraid of being truly seen. One opens up, the other runs, and in the end, they both walk away, telling themselves, maybe we just weren't compatible. When the truth is, they never learned how to love in a healthy way. So what's the way out? It begins by returning to yourself, by starting over. Not by learning how to impress others, but by learning how to feel again. Learning to name your emotions. To sit with sadness without shame. To say "I'm hurting" and not feel weak. To love yourself first so one day, you can love someone else honestly. Healing isn't a shortcut. It takes courage, patience, and brutal honesty. Honesty with yourself, with the parts of you you've buried for years. With the reality that you don't know how to love, but you want to learn. And that's when things start to change. When a man dares to face his inner wounds, he no longer needs to hide behind the mask of strength. He can walk out of the locked room not because someone pulled him out, but because he found the way back to himself. And when a man knows how to love himself in a healthy way, he no longer needs to beg for love from the outside. Love comes as a reward, not as a remedy, as a result, not as a rescue, as a resonance, not as a way to fill an emptiness. Live like a man you can be proud of. If you've made it this far, if you've ever felt left behind, overlooked, or questioned your own worth, then maybe it's time to hear this. You don't have to become society's idea of a man to be worthy of love. What you truly need is to become a version of yourself that you can respect, love, and be proud of when you look in the mirror every morning. Love is not a prize for the perfect. It doesn't arrive just because you're taller, richer, or more attractive. It comes when you live in alignment with who you really are. When you stop chasing validation from the outside and start building unshakable value from within. That's not easy, because for most of your life, you were likely taught that you had to do something to be lovable, that you had to prove yourself, outperform others, or stand out to be chosen. But if you spend your life running that race, you'll always be measured by other people's standards. And every time you're not picked, your self-worth will take another hit. So pause, not to give up, but to change direction. Instead of asking, how can I get someone to love me? Try asking, how can I live without betraying myself? Because when you live in integrity with your true self, you stop needing others to validate your existence. Attractiveness doesn't lie in your looks or bank account. It lives in the clarity in your eyes, the calm in your presence, and the quiet confidence of someone who knows who he is. The most attractive man isn't the one who plays the dating game well. He's the one who doesn't need to play at all. He doesn't chase love. Love follows him because his life already has purpose. You may not stand out in a crowd. You may not get swiped right on every dating app. But when you know what you want, believe in your worth, and live each day with intention, you've already won. Not against others, but against the version of yourself that once felt lost. And when you stop searching for love as a form of rescue, you'll realize you were never missing anything. You don't need someone to complete you. You are already whole. You just needed space to grow into your own skin. And if love comes, it will come not as something you depend on, but as something that complements the man you've become. No one teaches you this. There's no school for how to love yourself. But you can start small. Focus on inner growth. Practice gratitude. Learn to recognize your emotions, train discipline, live with responsibility, and day by day, you'll become someone even you would choose to stay with. That man doesn't need to be a CEO. He doesn't need six-pack abs. He doesn't need smooth lines. He just needs to be calm in a storm, kind to himself, and awake enough not to lose himself just to feel loved. Life isn't fair. You might still get rejected, still be left behind, still feel lonely at times, but you won't feel broken anymore. Because you no longer rely on someone else's gaze to feel valuable. And if someone does come along, someone who loves you not for the version you pretend to be, but for the man you truly are, that is the highest reward. Not because you chased love, but because you chased truth. So live like a man you can be proud of. A man who doesn't need to be chosen to feel worthy. A man who doesn't need perfection to feel enough. A man who doesn't need to win in someone else's eyes, only in his own. And if you're in a dark place right now, a deep, cold space where you feel like no one sees you, maybe this is your starting point. Not the beginning of a quest for love, but the beginning of your return back to yourself.